Animals and Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. Before we give you a brief background on our author, our critical literary approach is Marxist, and it's about class and power. Marxist criticism focuses on analyzing class and literature. John Steinbeck bio. He was born on February 27, 1902 in San Diego, California. Parents were John Ernest Steinbeck and Olive Hamilton. His first novel was Cup of Gold, was published in 1929. He was strongly influenced in his writing by Ed Ricketts in the 1930s and 1940s, and he was also one of his closest friends. He served in World War II, and after he returned with not only physical wounds but also mental trauma. He wrote Alfred Hitchcock's movie, Lifeboat, and among with others. Bio continue. He died in New York City on December 20th, 1968 from congestive heart failure. His body was later cremated and entered in March 4th, 1969. To this day, many of Steinbeck's works are required reading in most American high schools and is one of the top 10 most frequently read books. In the United Kingdom, of Mice and Men is one of the key texts used, and that's a picture of him. His memorial. Nobel Prize. In 1962, Steinbeck won the Nobel Prize for Literature because of his realistic and imaginative writing, combining as it does sympathetic humor and keen social perception. 50 years later, in 2012, the archives were reopened, and it turned out that he was the best out of a bad lot. The list included Robert Graves, Lawrence Durrell, and Jean Annet, and Karen Bixen.
Of course, like we've already both read and discussed the story, the chrysanthemums, but like here's a bit of a summary of it, which is Eliza Allen, who is married to her husband Harry, and they own like land and a foothill ranch in Salinas Valley, which is I guess like he wrote the story in the Salinas Valley because he was like born in Salinas, California. And since he lived kind of like during World War II and all that, women were still viewed as more property to the husband. And here it's like her husband seems indifferent to Eliza's gardening abilities because, as like we remember, she's like really proud of her flowers, and she says that she could do some more gardening, but he just blows her off because he feels like she doesn't really matter as much. And then when the salesman comes in the carriage, he doesn't really seem to care. All he wants is a job. And once he like sees what kind of like gets her into like opening up and like letting her give him a job, he uses her flowers against her. And throughout the story, he's like lying and manipulating her. And then eventually, like she sees, once her husband returns after selling something, they go out and she tries to create conversation even though she's like really sad, but then once like that kind of fails and she sees that her opinions aren't really valued as much as her husband, she like begins to cry, and then the story ends. And then a brief summary of Mice and Men, of those who haven't read it. Lenny and George are two immigrant workers headed to California for a job. And due to Lenny's mental disability, George is like the brains. He pretty much protects Lenny, even though Lenny is like much bigger than George. But George also complains a lot about how his life would be much easier, but it's just kind of like tough love because he really does care for Lenny as much as Lenny cares for him. And throughout the story, Lenny loves to pet small animals, and he ends, like what happens because he's too strong, so he ends up hurting the animals and accidentally killing them. So George is always getting mad at him, and eventually George kills the puppy accidentally, and the wife of the landowner that they're working for, she goes to try to comfort him, and because he's attracted to like pretty things, and he wants to touch her hair because it looks so pretty, and he ends up grabbing her hair too hard, and she cries out, and he kind of like gets startled and tries to quiet her down, but he ends up breaking her neck. So he knows he did something bad, so he's like runs away and tries to go hide away from what's gonna happen. And Curly, which is the husband, he sends the other workers to go after him, and George, who is one of the workers, has to go too. So George makes it his mission to find him first, and he eventually has to kill him because he's afraid that they're gonna do something worse to him. So he and throughout the story, he's telling him that they're working in order to get land, in order to get this beautiful land, and they're gonna own all kinds of animals to make Lenny happy, and then eventually he has to kill him. And our central idea is the Marxist theory is class and power, and how they go hand in hand in the stories, the Chrysanthemum and of Mice and Men, and both show higher class that holds the power. For example, in the Chrysanthemums, men are the higher class because the wife, she doesn't have a job, so he has the money, and so he has more money than she does. And back then, of course, like the men seem to be in a whole social class all on their own, which is why she, like, if you realize in the story, like she never leaves that area of property that they live in unless she's with her husband. And the salesman finds a way to trick Eliza into giving him work, and which he uses like her weakness as an advantage, but of course like he doesn't really care for her ideas. And of Mice and Men, the owner's son Curly, who is the husband of the girl who died, tells the workers, including George, to kill Lenny, which is his own friend that they've known each other all their lives. And it's a perfect example of just how much power Curly has, because he's the son of a wealthy landowner where George is working at. So, of course, in like class and power, it holds a lot of like sway over the workers, including George, because he doesn't want to lose his job either. And the works cited.